Married to my husband, Ryan, a 32-year-old man, for 6 years, I truly believed we had a strong and loving relationship. Like any couple, we had our share of arguments and challenges over the years, but we always managed to work through them together and come out stronger. Everything seemed perfectly fine until about 8 months ago, when my younger sister, Star, 28, moved back to her hometown after living in Florida since she was 18 years old. According to Star, her long-term boyfriend had suddenly ended their relationship, abandoned her financially, and moved away to another city. She claimed the breakup happened because she discovered he had been cheating on her with men. Honestly, the story sounded strange to me. I had only met the guy 3 times during their entire 5-year relationship, because Star rarely came home except for Christmas, and even then she usually stayed only 3 or 4 days. He accompanied her twice during those visits, and the third time I met him was during a one-day stop while Ryan and I were on vacation 3 years earlier. From the little I knew of him, he never seemed like someone secretly living a double life, and then disappearing while leaving Star with nothing. I even tried reaching out to him once to hear his side of things, but I realized he had blocked me, so eventually I stopped digging into it. When Star returned home, she moved back in with our parents, Gina, 55, and Jimmy, 56. During her first month back, she struggled to find a job, so I suggested that Ryan might be able to help her. He held a high position at his company, and I assumed he could pull a few strings. Sure enough, he helped her get a position in his department, which also happened to match her professional field. For context, my sister and I have never had a particularly close relationship. She has always been the golden child, especially in our mother's eyes, while my father never had the backbone to challenge her favoritism. It wasn't usually blatant favoritism, but rather 1,000 tiny examples spread across our lives. When we each turned 16, we both received cars, but I got an 8-year-old Dodge Neon, while Star received a nearly new Mitsubishi Eclipse that was only 2 years old. My parents spent thousands of dollars over the years on our dance classes, costumes, and competitions, many of which required 6 or 7-hour trips, and they never complained once. Meanwhile, whenever I asked for something simple, like $50 to attend a local volleyball or basketball camp hosted by the college in our town, they acted as though I was demanding they build me my own sports arena. What frustrated me most happened when I was 17. One night, I lost track of time while out with my boyfriend and came home only 15 minutes after curfew. My parents punished me by taking away my car for an entire month. Yet the following year, when Star came home 2 hours late smelling like marijuana, she received nothing more than a stern lecture. Because of all this, I honestly wasn't upset when she left for college and eventually decided to stay in Florida permanently. Despite our history, once she moved back home, she started spending more and more time at my house. At first, I thought maybe she was genuinely trying to build a better relationship with me, which I appreciated. But over time, I began noticing how unusually close she and Ryan were becoming. They could talk endlessly about practically anything. They developed inside jokes that excluded me completely, and whenever I tried joining the conversation, they would brush me off by saying it was just work stuff. When I questioned Ryan about it, he explained that they simply had a lot in common and were collaborating on several projects together at work. The first major red flag appeared after about a month. Star began regularly showing up at our house before I got home from work. Ryan worked a traditional 8 to 4:30 schedule, while I usually worked from 10 o'clock in the morning until 7 o'clock at night. More and more often, I would walk through the door and find Star already there with him. Every time I asked what she was doing there, the answer was always the same: we had some work things to finish. Then, about 2 months ago, something happened that made me question my own sanity. Every morning before leaving for work, I make the bed the exact same way. I always position the pillowcases so that the openings face outward toward the edge of the bed. One evening after Star had spent the day at our house, we ate dinner together before she returned to my parents' home. Later that night, when Ryan and I got into bed, I immediately noticed that 2 of the pillows had been turned around so the openings faced inward toward the center. I asked Ryan if he had been lying in bed during the day. He looked startled for a second before answering no and asking why. I explained that the bed was arranged differently from how I had made it that morning. He insisted I must have remembered incorrectly because nobody had been in the bed all day. After that, I secretly searched through his phone and laptop, hoping either to confirm my fears or prove myself wrong. I found absolutely nothing. But then again, they spent 8 hours together at work every weekday and still spent time together afterward. They really wouldn't need to text each other constantly. I started feeling like I was going insane. 2 weeks ago, my parents invited us over for dinner, and during the evening, I witnessed something I still can't erase from my mind. Ryan was simply walking past Star when she lightly grabbed his arm. He turned toward her, and she leaned in to whisper something in his ear. Then, for just a brief second, they touched their foreheads together intimately before Ryan suddenly pulled away and continued walking. Star looked directly at me afterward, smiled slightly, and casually went back to whatever she had been doing. At that point, I knew I wasn't imagining things anymore. The signs were overwhelming. Still, I desperately didn't want to believe the truth. I had been deeply in love with Ryan ever since I was 21 years old, and the idea that he could betray me with my own sister felt impossible to accept. Hoping for reassurance, I planned a romantic weekend getaway to the city so we could spend time together and finally talk honestly about everything. Deep down, I wanted him to tell me I was wrong. The trip started wonderfully. Friday night felt almost magical. We drank together, danced together, and were intimate. By Saturday morning, we had more activities planned, and for a moment, I nearly convinced myself not to bring up my suspicions at all. I kept thinking there was no way he could behave so lovingly toward me while secretly sleeping with my sister behind my back. But I was wrong. Right before we left to start our Saturday plans, I finally looked him in the eyes and directly asked him whether he was having an affair with Star. He started crying the moment I asked him, and through tears he admitted that yes, he had been having an affair with my sister. In that instant, it felt like my entire heart shattered. I demanded to know why, and all he could say was that he was sorry and that he never intended for things to go this far. According to him, they had simply connected so naturally that one thing led to another. First it was flirting, then kissing, and eventually much more. I asked him the question I had been dreading most of all, whether he had been sleeping with her in our bed while I was still at work. Instead of answering directly, he lowered his head in shame and looked away. That alone told me everything I needed to know. I walked out immediately. I didn't grab clothes, toiletries, or anything important. All I had with me was my purse as I drove home alone, completely numb. Ryan took an Uber back later that evening and brought the rest of my belongings. He kept trying to apologize, but I couldn't even look at him. I sat there crying while he packed a bag and left for a hotel. The following day, I confronted my parents and told them everything. To my shock, they already knew about the affair. They claimed they were sorry for what happened and told me Star had left the previous night and probably wouldn't return for a few days. I had no doubt she was staying with Ryan. That all happened 3 months ago. Our divorce is nearly finalized now. Ryan rented an apartment almost immediately after we separated, and Star moved in with him shortly afterward. The only communication I have with him now concerns divorce paperwork and legal matters. At first, he said I could keep both the house and our savings account. I honestly think guilt was driving those decisions. But only a few days later, he suddenly changed his mind and insisted we would need to split the house after all. I know Star was behind that change, whispering in his ear and pushing him to fight me on it. Fortunately, I had already transferred all the money from our savings into a separate account, so at least there was no battle there. Just like that, 9 years of my life disappeared. The sad thing is that Ryan has absolutely no idea what kind of person he chose over me. Star is deeply narcissistic, and eventually she will toss him aside the same way she does with everyone once she gets bored or no longer benefits from them. Throughout all of this, Star has been unbelievably cruel. Only a few days after I discovered the affair, she tagged me in a Facebook post. It was a selfie of her and Ryan together, with him kissing her on the cheek from behind while she smiled at the camera. The caption said, "Feeling loved." It made me physically sick. I immediately logged out of Facebook and deleted the app from my phone. About an hour later, she texted me saying, "Sorry sis, didn't mean to tag you. No hard feelings. I hope we can still stay close. You'll meet your soulmate someday too." I blocked her instantly on everything I could think of, My parents were no better. At first, they pretended to sympathize with me, but the truth eventually came out. When I told them I was cutting all contact with both Star and Ryan, my mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "I'm sorry this happened. It shouldn't have happened this way, but your sister deserves to be happy too. You'll meet someone else eventually, and then we can all move past this." I completely lost my temper after hearing that. I reminded them about the humiliating Facebook post and the disgusting text Star had sent me afterward. My mother simply shrugged it off and replied, "Well, you shouldn't be wasting time on social media anyway." As for my father, he barely spoke during any of it. He mostly sat there silently while my mother defended Star. Eventually, I asked him directly what he thought about everything, and all he said was, "I agree with your mother," before getting up and walking out of the room. That was the final straw for me, that I decided to go completely no contact with my parents as well. Once the house sells, I'm moving to another state, and I'm not telling any of my family where I'm going or when I'm leaving. None of them know about my plans because I am completely done with all of them. At this point, I honestly wish every single one of them the worst. Update. Hello, everyone. I know it has been 4 years since my last update, but something major recently happened, and I wanted to share everything. First, I'll update you on my own life. I'm recently engaged. It took me a very long time and a tremendous amount of therapy before I felt emotionally ready to open myself up to another relationship. When I first moved to Minnesota, I tried dating almost immediately. I even went on one decent first date, but shortly afterward the guy revealed himself to be a complete and unbearable jerk. After that experience, I swore off men entirely for a while. That's when I finally started therapy seriously to process the trauma from my husband and sister betraying me, as well as the emotional abandonment from my parents. That first year was incredibly difficult, but eventually things began getting better. Then I met James, a 37-year-old man. Ironically, he shares the same first name as my father, which still makes me laugh sometimes. But unlike my father, James is kind, supportive, and genuinely wonderful. He's a chef, and he owns a successful restaurant and bar alongside his fraternal twin brother, Jack. The business is thriving, and for the first time in years, I feel genuinely excited about building a future with someone. But enough about me. Now let me tell you about the unbelievable audacity my family had after everything they put me through. Roughly 9 months after I moved away, while I was still completely no contact with everyone, I came home one evening to find a wedding invitation sitting in my mailbox. It was an invitation to Ryan and Star's wedding. The invitation included a nauseating photograph of the two of them embracing in the middle of a sunflower field. As if that wasn't bad enough, my parents had also included a letter. The message basically said that I needed to forgive everyone and finally move on because family works through problems. They admitted things hadn't happened in the best way possible, but insisted we were still family and should put the past behind us. Then came the most unbelievable part. Apparently Star wanted me to be one of her bridesmaids, just like she had been one of mine. What kind of insane thinking is that? That letter reopened so many emotional wounds I had been trying to heal from. At the time, my therapist definitely earned extra money because of how badly it affected me. Looking back now, I can laugh at the absurdity of it, but back then it devastated me all over again. I never responded to the invitation or the letter. The only action I took was figuring out which member of my extended family had given my address to my parents and ex-husband. Once I found out, I cut that person out of my life too. Which brings me to the newest disaster. Last week, out of absolutely nowhere, Ryan showed up at my apartment. James and I don't live together yet, although that's going to change very soon. And when I opened the door, Ryan looked completely different from the man I remembered. He looked good, almost too good, like he had gone out of his way to make himself appear as attractive and put together as possible before showing up at my door. The moment I opened it, I asked him bluntly, "What do you want?" He sighed and said, "I just want to talk. I'm so sorry for everything I did. Star and I are getting divorced. I found out she was cheating on me our entire marriage. Honestly, surprise, surprise." Then he continued, "I don't expect you to take me back, but I think we should talk and get some closure for both our sakes." I actually blinked twice because I genuinely couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man had completely lost his mind. I stared directly at him and said, "No, you don't get closure from me. You made your own bed. Did you seriously think that golden tramp of yours, the one who's had more visitors than a Holiday Inn, was suddenly going to put up a no vacancy sign just because you married her? You're even dumber than I thought. I forgive absolutely nothing. I want nothing from you. My life is far better without you in it, and that will never change. You can both go to hell." Then I turned around, walked back into my apartment, and locked the door behind me. Right afterward, I called my landlady, who is honestly one of the sweetest elderly women I've ever met. Over the past 4 years, we had grown pretty close, and she knew everything about my previous marriage and the betrayal. Ryan was still standing around in the hallway outside my apartment, refusing to leave. A few minutes later, her 2 nephews, the men who helped maintain the apartment property, arrived and informed Ryan very clearly that he was not welcome there. They told him he had effectively been banned from the property, and that if he returned, the police would be called for trespassing. I hoped that would finally be the end of it. Unfortunately, it wasn't. I now work a fairly standard 9-to-5 schedule, which means I spend a lot of evenings at the restaurant whenever James is managing. I never interfere with his work. I mostly sit quietly, enjoy the atmosphere, and appreciate the little moments of time he's able to spend with me between tasks. Over the years, I've become close friends with many members of the staff, including several relatives of James and Jack. The entire environment feels like the warm, supportive family atmosphere I always wished I had growing up. The very next evening after Ryan appeared at my apartment, I was sitting at the restaurant when he suddenly walked in, came straight over, and sat down at my table as if he belonged there. It happened to be a slow Tuesday night, and James noticed immediately. He came over right away to check on me. He recognized Ryan instantly from the old photographs I had once shown him. Ryan extended his hand toward James as though they were about to have some kind of civilized introduction. James looked down at the hand without shaking it, then calmly looked at me and asked, "Do you want me to throw him out?" I replied, "Not yet. I got a couple questions first." Ryan immediately perked up like he thought this was somehow a positive sign, as though he was finally winning me over. What an absolute idiot. I asked him to explain exactly what had happened between him and Star. I'll admit, my curiosity was completely fueled by morbid fascination more than anything else. Ryan explained that Star had been involved in at least 2 affairs with married men during their marriage. Old habits die hard, apparently. This started about 2 years into our marriage, he said dramatically. It was a really difficult time for me. I nearly rolled my eyes into another dimension. I interrupted him and asked, "You can't possibly be that stupid, though. Did you at least protect yourself financially, or did she take half of everything you owned?" Ryan actually looked smug as he answered, "I stayed with her for almost another year after I found out," he explained, "so I could quietly move money into savings and sell some assets beforehand. In the end, she only got a small fraction of what she would have received otherwise." Then I asked the question I actually cared about. "And what happened to her after the divorce?" Ryan replied, "She had to move back in with your parents again." The satisfaction I felt hearing that was honestly unbelievable. I smiled and said, "Perfect. Thank you. That's exactly what I wanted to know. You can leave now." James immediately stepped forward and said firmly, "You heard her. Out of my restaurant, Ryan." But Ryan still tried to protest. "No, wait, I just want to—" I cut him off instantly. No forgiveness. No closure. I only wanted confirmation that my loser sister ended up back at home with our parents. "Now get out." James stood beside the table and pointed directly toward the door. Ryan looked around and finally realized the bartender and 2 members of the wait staff were glaring at him as well. Clearly understanding he was outnumbered and unwanted, he tucked his tail between his legs and headed for the exit. As he was leaving, James called after him, "And if you ever come back—" Ryan quickly interrupted with, Yeah, I know. Police. Trespassing." Once he finally disappeared, nearly everyone working there came over to check on me. It was both comforting and slightly embarrassing at the same time. My future in-laws, who I absolutely adore, even called afterward and insisted that I stay at James's place for the next couple of days just to be safe. Honestly, it was incredibly sweet. I had never experienced a family caring about me that way before. Thankfully, I never heard from Ryan again after that encounter, and hopefully I never will. Update. Hi everyone. I honestly didn't think I would ever have another update after all this time, but somehow life managed to create even more drama. First, a little update about me. I'm now 41 years old and the mother of two boys. One is 6 years old and the other is 2. James and I are doing incredibly well together. These days, I work part-time as the office manager for the restaurants, and things have grown quite a bit over the years. About 3 years ago, one of James's cousins invested in the business, which allowed us to open a second restaurant location. It's definitely created much more work for everyone involved, but because James, Jack, and their cousin all stay heavily involved in operating both locations, the businesses have remained successful while still allowing each of them some personal time and balance. Ironically, I'm fairly certain I got pregnant with our oldest son while I was staying with James after his parents insisted I remain there following my last confrontation with Ryan. His parents now jokingly claim the entire thing was secretly part of their plan because they always wanted grandchildren as soon as possible. Now on to the real update. After Ryan tracked me down years ago, I assumed it was only a matter of time before either my parents or Star eventually showed up too. Surprisingly, it didn't happen immediately. Over time, I relaxed a little because I finally felt like I had a genuine support system around me. Eventually, I even rejoined social media. I still remained completely no contact with most of my family, including many extended relatives, but I also understood that if they truly wanted to locate me, they probably could. It wasn't until after our first son was born that I finally got the first message eventually came from my mother. It included a weak, half-hearted apology, some vague comments about forgiveness, and then questions about her grandson. I was originally planning to simply block her immediately, but the implication that my child somehow belonged to her as a grandparent deeply offended me. So instead, I responded. I told her, "You do not have any grandchildren. I am no longer your daughter, which means my children have absolutely no connection to you. If you want grandchildren so badly, maybe you should encourage Star to go out and continue doing what she does best." After sending that message, I blocked her. For a while afterward, she continued creating new accounts and attempting to contact me through different platforms. But every single time, I either ignored, deleted, or declined the messages and requests without responding. That brings me to the newest round of drama. Recently, I started getting flooded with messages, requests, and attempts at contact from multiple family members. I read a few of them out of curiosity, and they were all basically emotional sob stories about how much they missed being part of my children's lives and how badly they wanted to make amends. Honestly, I didn't care. I had absolutely no intention of ever allowing those people back into my life again. Then something even more surprising happened. Star herself started reaching out to me. At first, she wasn't saying much beyond insisting that she desperately wanted to talk. After this continued for roughly 3 weeks, I finally agreed to a Zoom call, but under one condition: it would only involve me. No children. The moment the call started, they immediately began asking to see my kids. I refused without hesitation. I told them my sons already had 3 grandparents in their lives: James's mother, father, and grandmother, and that was more than enough. Very quickly, I began sensing that this conversation was actually about something else entirely. Star looked awful. She appeared exhausted, pale, and unhealthy. My parents looked older too, worn down and drained. As the conversation continued, they all started apologizing for the past. Even Star claimed she regretted what she had done and said she wished she could have her sister back. That statement alone almost made me laugh. Then my mother took over the conversation and launched into her usual speech about families sticking together, supporting one another, and overcoming hardships as a unit. When she finally finished talking, I simply looked at all of them and said, "Is that everything? Because if so, I'm leaving." That's when they panicked and begged me to wait. And finally, the mask came off. The real reason they had been trying so desperately to reconnect was finally revealed. Apparently, Star had been suffering from serious health problems for the past couple of years. For reasons the doctors still didn't fully understand, her kidneys were failing, and she now urgently needed a transplant. Suddenly, their persistent attempts to contact me made perfect sense. A biological family member would be the most likely donor match. I looked directly at them and asked, "So this is why you contacted me? You wanted to save her? Taking my husband wasn't enough? Now she wants one of my organs too." My mother immediately snapped at me. "Stop acting like this. Everything that happened was years ago." Then she started crying as she continued speaking. "I know you hate us, but she's going to die if she doesn't get a transplant soon. Is that really what you want? I understand you think she hurt you in the worst possible way, but please, just this once, can't you put that aside?" I stayed quiet because I wanted to hear how much worse this conversation could possibly get. Eventually, my father, who rarely spoke much at all, finally joined in. "Look," he said, "we know everything that happened was terrible, and we're sorry. But we've got major problems now. Between Star's medical bills and the fact she can't work anymore, your mother and I are struggling too. We're getting older ourselves and dealing with health issues. We're drowning financially. We need you to come back to Missouri to see if you're a match. But honestly, we could use financial help too, or we might lose the house." I stared at him and replied, "So you need both my kidney and my money?" "Don't put it like that," he answered weakly. Then Star started crying and said, "Please just come home. I need my big sister. I don't want to die. Can you at least come and see if you're a match? If you aren't, we'll never contact you again." I told them I needed time to think and do some research, and that I would give them my answer the following day. Then I ended the call. Afterward, I sat down with James and explained everything. He told me he would support whatever decision I made 100%. Then he asked whether the entire family should travel with me, or if he should at least come along himself. I said no to both options. If I was going back to Missouri, I was going alone. Sure enough, I informed my former family that I would first complete compatibility testing in Minnesota, and if I turned out to be a match, I would travel back home to discuss everything else in person. About a week later, the results came back. Star and I were a perfect match, so I agreed to return to St. Charles. By the time I arrived, Star's condition had worsened enough that she had already been admitted into the hospital. At least that kept everyone too distracted for family dinners or emotional reunions, because I had absolutely no interest in doing anything social with any of them. Especially because every single time my parents found a spare moment alone with me, they immediately started hinting about whether I had considered helping them financially with their debts and struggles. Eventually, the doctors stabilized Star enough for transplant discussions, and I attended a meeting with the medical team that would potentially perform the surgery. As they began explaining the process to me privately, I interrupted and requested that everyone be present for the conversation. So we all gathered together in Star's hospital room. My parents were already sitting beside her bed. The doctor carefully explained the situation to all of us. Without a transplant, Star likely had no more than 6 months left to live. They walked us through the entire procedure and repeatedly emphasized what an extraordinarily perfect donor match I was. According to them, the chances of finding another donor anywhere near as compatible were extremely small. They stressed that the sooner surgery happened, the better her odds would be. Once they finished talking, I slowly walked over to Star's bedside and gently took her hand. I looked directly into her large brown eyes and quietly said, "Did you hear all that? I'm a perfect match. Basically, I'm the only person who can save your life." Then I paused, and "I'm not going to do it." The room instantly froze. I continued staring at her while speaking calmly. "You are the most vile, narcissistic piece of human garbage I have ever known. I only came here so you would understand that the one person capable of keeping you alive is also the person you betrayed more than anyone else in this world. And now you're paying for that with your own life. You are going to die, and you should start making peace with that reality." Star immediately burst into tears. My parents started yelling at me at the same time, while the doctor and nurse stood there completely stunned and speechless. I turned toward my parents and said, "Do not even speak to me, and never ask me for anything ever again." Then I added, "The only money I would ever spend on either of you would be for your funerals, and only under the condition that you were cremated and your ashes were handed directly to me, so I could dump them into the filthiest public toilet I could find." After saying everything I needed to say, I walked out of that hospital room and never looked back. Now I'm finally home again, my real home, surrounded by my actual family, and I genuinely could not be happier.